Hey, 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 everybody. How is it going? Welcome to the stream. It is Thursday. I know it is like 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern and not like 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern. But when and if you guys ever come to South Florida, you will learn that South Florida traffic is my worst nightmare. So I had the opportunity at the very last second to get in for getting my hair done, which is kind of important in the realm of work that I am in, because I looked at myself on People of the Internet today and realized my hair is like wildly too dark and it was time to get it done. So I got an appointment at the very last second, and then I sat in traffic for like 2 hours on the way home and my blood was boiling, but it's okay. We've got the pooch. We've got a fresh hairdo. Life is good. I can't really complain in the grand scheme of things. Also, because today is the type of day it decided to be, sorry that YouTube was having a literal aneurysm there for a second. We had like 8 different streaming events going at the same time. I don't exactly know what happened there, but I think we're good. I think we're live. I think everything is just fine on YouTube, so let us know in the chat that you guys are okay. But I'm excited to be with you guys today because we have an extra special interview lined up for the stream today with my new friend, Dr. Paul Saladino, who you guys might know as his previous moniker, especially on Instagram, as Carnivore MD. We pre-recorded this conversation earlier in the week because, as I'm sure you can imagine, he is like one of the busiest people on the planet as a doctor, saving lives and making content and talking to people about holistic health in general. So we're super honored to have Dr. Saladino on the stream today with a pre-recorded interview that we're going to play here in just a minute. But first, I thought it would be interesting if you guys haven't been exposed to the all-out assault on meat and the meat industry that is happening in society, to just go to the 30,000 foot level of what's going on with the world and the loudest, most powerful voices in the world attacking meat and agriculture and farming and ranching, and why we think that's happening. I've talked about this at length on the stream in the past year or so, and there are very few people drawing attention to this huge issue when it comes to holistic health, when it comes to our diets, when it comes to our ability to take care of ourselves and long-term health for human beings, not relying on the pharmaceutical industry or our increasingly corrupt Western medicine system that absolutely has its place, but often goes way rogue in the wrong direction. One of the things that's really been bothering me is that I'm seeing this unilateral messaging and narrative put out by the most powerful politicians in Washington, D.C., unelected bureaucrats at the WHO or at the CDC, at the NIH, and all of our other food and drug related industries in Washington, D.C., and in the bureaucracy levels of government and at the global level as well, as I mentioned with the WHO and the UN. I'm seeing this push to make meat plant-based all the time, even though statistically speaking, it's probably not the best choice for you to make. And we're going to get into that with our conversation with Dr. Saladino here in a little bit. But perhaps the most egregious example of all of this is I'm being told by everyone all the time that eating meat is terrible for the environment. It's awful for the earth. If you care at all about saving the planet and saving your brothers and sisters from all over the world, the only way to prevent total destruction of our planet is to just stop eating meat. And objectively speaking, that's not true. But even just last week at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting, week and a half ago, there was a new term coined by one of the speakers, ecocide, that you are committing ecocide, which is like homicide for killing another human being, or suicide for killing yourself, or infanticide if you kill a baby, or genocide if you kill an entire group of people. Ecocide is a new term being thrown around by these absolute power-hungry maniacs who are trying to convince you that you need to rely on the products that they are selling you for your health and for your long-term longevity in life, or you are committing ecocide and officially hate the planet. So under the guise of telling you that you are this horrible planet-destroying monster who needs to start giving up meat, I've noticed that these same people are starting to sell us products that they have a vested financial interest in, whether that's through the pharmaceutical industry to help solve a lot of the problems that we have in a very obese, very undernutritious society, or it's a food product that they're marketing as a healthier alternative, either for ourselves or for the planet. And there's just a little too many red strings all connected on the corkboard for me to not think that there has to be some sort of problem associated with all of this. So you guys just tell me, because I can't be the only one seeing all of these things happening at the same time. As we know from last June, in the United States of America, the first ever lab-grown meat was approved for sale. This is from the journal Scientific American, and we talked about this immediately when it happened last June, which is insane, by the way, that it's been 7 months since this happened. Like, blows my mind. But for the very first time ever in certain restaurants in San Francisco and Washington, D.C., lab-grown chicken is approved for human consumption thanks to the U.S. Department of Agriculture granting the first ever green light for something like this to happen. Just last week, Israel joined the party and became the next country to give the green light to make the world's first cultivated beef steaks. So in America right now, we're starting to make lab-grown chicken or lab-cultivated chicken. In Israel, they're starting to experiment with cultivated beef, aka lab-grown beef. And if that seems confusing to you and you're like, what the actual heck is lab-grown meat? Essentially, they're just taking stem cells, reproducing them in a bioreactor in a laboratory and differentiating them into muscle and fat cells, and then trying to sell it to you as a healthier product than just eating meat that was cultivated from an animal in a food processing facility or in a butcher shop, or even better, if you hunted that animal yourself or had that animal on your own property as a farmer or rancher. So they're trying to convince you this is healthier. Never mind the fact that there are scientists speaking up across the board suggesting that there might be massive problems associated with eating lab-grown meat from a cancer perspective, because when you're cultivating stem cells and you're trying to differentiate them appropriately, there might actually be problems with these stem cells being cultivated into different types of cells in turning on or off your tumor suppressor genes in your own body after you've eaten this product. And some studies are starting to come out about the environmental impact of lab-grown meat, that everybody tells you meat is murder, not just for you, but for the planet and obviously the animal, but especially the planet. But now they're starting to say that lab-grown meat is going to have a 50 times higher environmental impact in terms of carbon emissions than just normal agriculture. So you tell me what's the healthier alternative. But even if they're not trying to get of Beyond Meat, the plant-based meat alternative is everywhere. And everywhere I go, I see people and billboards and commercials and influencers talking about how plant-based meat is way better for you and way better for the planet than traditional protein sources from meat. You guys probably have heard of the Beyond Burger at this point. Beyond Meat is like a massive umbrella company now that makes more than just burgers, but it's a plant-based burger that they say looks, cooks, and satisfies like beef. It actually like bleeds on your plate, which is super weird and creepy to me. And when you think of a healthier alternative, you might be thinking of, okay, it's a whole food, right? Generally, whole foods that are just one ingredient tend to be a lot healthier for you than something that's really ultra processed and goes through lots of rounds of chemical testing and product compensation and all of these things. But instead, no, if you scroll down on the Beyond Meat website, this is the list of ingredients that are present in a Beyond Burger. Water, pea protein, expeller pressed canola oil, that's a seed oil, by the way, which is terrible for you, refined coconut oil, rice protein, natural flavors, dried yeast, cocoa butter, methyl cellulose, potato starch, salt, potassium chloride, beet juice color, apple extract, pomegranate concentrate, sunflower oil, vinegar, lemon juice concentrate, and a bunch of vitamins and minerals. So when we have to have, I don't know, let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 ingredients to make a healthier alternative to the thing that has one ingredient, meat. Is that really a healthier alternative? I just am not buying it. And it's going even beyond meat now. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the last time you walked through the egg and butter aisle at the grocery store, you may have seen packaging for this new thing called Just Egg, which is the most misleading title of a food brand ever, because if something is just that thing, one could imagine it is literally just that thing. But Just Egg is not at all egg. There is no egg associated with this brand. It is rather a egg alternative that is plant-based. There are no eggs involved in Just Egg, which should be illegal to call it that in and of itself. But they market this as a healthy new alternative. It's so much better for you than eating eggs, and then you don't have to worry about the ethics or the environmental impact or any of these things. And the exact same thing can be true from Beyond Meat to this Just Egg alternative. Their branding is super modern and clean and healthy looking. But if you go on the back corners of their website, this is not easy to find. It's not on the homepage. To what the ingredients are: water, mung bean protein, expeller pressed canola oil, again, a seed oil, which is terrible for you, dehydrated onion, gel and gum, natural carrot extractives for the color, turmeric extractives for the color, potassium citrate, salt, sugar, tapioca syrup solids. What does that even mean? A tapioca, I can't even talk. Syrup solids, tetrasodium pyrophosphate, transglutamase, and niacin. So we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 ingredients for something that is a healthy alternative and a healthy replacement for something that is just one ingredient, which is the actual Just Egg. And if you do any digging at all associated with any of these meat alternatives, whether that's lab-grown meat or plant-based protein and plant-based meat, it's pretty easy to find out who is financing this stuff. And it's basically all of the same people that just lectured you at the World Economic Forum about how evil agriculture is and how terrible for the environment it is. If you happen to enjoy meat in your diet, they are the ones bankrolling this new endeavor of both plant-based meat and lab-grown meat. And so it doesn't surprise me then when all of these things are intimately connected, and when our government goes out of its way to try to tell us that meat is bad for you. There was a story that came out last January, so just over a year ago, that our friends over at Good Ranchers covered extensively, that a government-funded food pyramid started to tell people that Lucky Charms are healthier for you than steak. That Lucky Charms cereal are healthier for you than steak. And if you look at this food pyramid or food scale of what's nutritious or not, this will blow your freaking mind. Watermelon's at the very top. Kale is at the very top, which is interesting because I feel like kale is like the quintessential vegan staple for everything. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, ground beef, cheese, and a whole egg in butter. So animal-based products. Lucky Charms receives a 60 in this scale. You can see it right above me here. And ground beef only got a 26% healthy for you on this government-funded food pyramid. Gee, I wonder why they're trying to get you to buy ultra-processed foods and plant-based alternatives and lab-grown meat that's supposedly better for you. It's not at all like there could be an ulterior motive. And it's not at all concerning or odd that the things that humans have been eating for literally thousands of years, meat, eggs, butter, cheese, are unhealthy. They're terrible for you. But this thing that we just invented like 5 minutes ago is great. It's the healthiest possible thing for you to consume. Don't ever assume you should eat anything else. Luckily, there are very wonderful, benevolent people out there in the universe who are trying to do the right thing and to make sure that humans are fueling themselves appropriately with the right food. Our friends over in Italy, any Italians in the chat today, saw the first ever country ban on lab-grown meat last November, so just a few months ago. Your prime minister is the freaking GOAT, Giorgia Meloni, but all of your MPs worked for all of this. And I think it's absolutely fantastic because this is A, supporting agriculture and supporting farmers and ranchers, but B, creating actual government policy based in health interests for the general population. And I think that is just absolutely fantastic. It goes to show that it can be done at the government level, even if certain people and certain countries and certain governments don't share the same vested interests in trying to help keep us healthy. And I think it also reinforces the value of our vote. The people that we stand up for, the people that we elect, the people that we go out of our way to support matter, and the policies that those people create matter for our individual health and the health of society at large. Outside of politics, there's also a lot of really great people just doing whatever they can to spread the word about functional medicine and holistic health and going back to our roots as human beings for what type of food we should be putting in our bodies, that this highly processed crap is really not the answer, that it's not going to be healthy for us, and actually it's causing massive societal level damage to all of us if we continue going in this direction. And a long time ago, I started following one of these people, and that's our friend, Dr. Paul Saladino, who I'm super excited to have joining us on the stream today. You guys might recognize his name that he previously went by on social media, Carnivore MD. Dr. Saladino is amazing and is talking not just about the importance of meat and protein in your diet, why meat is being vilified by so many of the loudest voices, but also where medical education has gone wrong after he obtained his MD at the University of Arizona, where Big Pharma has taken over far too much in the world of medicine and food and holistic health in general, where individual people can feel more empowered to take responsibility for their diet and for their health, and even where forever chemicals are living in the crotch of your favorite Lululemon leggings, which was a very viral video from a few months ago of Dr. Saladino's, and everything in between. So I'm really, really excited to have him on the stream today. We're going to talk about all kinds of fun stuff together. If you guys are just now joining us, I said this at the beginning of the stream, but I always like to maintain as much transparency around here as possible. As you can imagine, Dr. Saladino is one of the busiest people on the face of planet Earth. So we had to pre-record this with him a few days ago. My hair is going to look different in the next video, and you're going to tell it's pre-recorded, but we always love to tell you guys that up front. I will be hanging out in the chat to answer any questions, and we will see you on the other side of this interview. Yeah. Dr. Saladino, thank you so much for joining us on the stream today. I have been a huge fan of yours for a very long time and closely following all of your very controversial, sadly, content out there about the carnivore diet and toxins in society. But for those who are living under a rock and have no idea who you are, can you just give us a really brief overview into who you are and how you got started doing what you're doing?
I'm a medical doctor. I did my medical training at the University of Arizona, got an MD there, and did my residency at the University of Washington. I studied psychiatry. Well, I did my residency in psychiatry because I was originally interested in kind of mental health and inflammation in the brain and the connections between all of those things and diet and where it was all coming from. Since then, I've kind of widened my perspective. And even in my residency in psychiatry, I was basically from the beginning, I've just been disappointed at the way that Western medicine sees illness and wanted to think about it differently. I got really interested in autoimmune disease, especially in my residency, when I kind of realized that so many of the illnesses that we think of are autoimmune in nature, which just means that the immune system is attacking the human body. So after, or even during my residency, I got interested in different ways of eating. I had an autoimmune condition, eczema and asthma, which are sort of this atopic continuum. And changing my diet really improved my autoimmune condition, but I changed my diet in this super controversial way, cutting out all the plants, which is ironic because at the time I was very interested in functional medicine and other types of medical paradigms that would say that plants are the best thing ever and that more plants is always better. And the reason you're sick is because you're not eating enough plants. And so I think that there's a lot of nuance in there. And I do eat some plants now, specifically fruit. We can get into that later in the podcast. But for about a year and a half, I did a full strict carnivore diet. Eczema gets better. I ran into some speed bumps later on in the process that we can talk about. So it's just been a long learning journey. But what's interesting to me in my training throughout all this was that Western medicine didn't care, didn't have any interest in understanding the effect of diet on illness, especially autoimmune illness or neuroinflammation in the brain connected with anything, whether it's a neurodegenerative condition like dementia or an Alzheimer's or a cognitive decline as we age, or depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia. None of these things are even it's really not in the playbook at all. And it extends to really all the autoimmune diseases we see, and most of the diseases we see in Western medicine in general. So I kind of expanded my focus to think about everything after residency and just started doing educational stuff. I wrote a book called The Carnivore Code, which is an interesting thing because the challenging thing about writing a book is you freeze all of your ideas into like carbonite, and it's not necessarily a living document. So, but anyway, I wrote a book, then I wrote a cookbook. My views have changed and evolved, but I think that foundationally, what I'm very interested in is just how humans can thrive and be well, and hoping with my work to provide ideas to people that they can investigate when they're not thriving. Because I think if people are doing great, then awesome, keep doing what you're doing. But there's a lot of people who have autoimmune disease or other issues, things we don't even think about as autoimmune disease, who aren't finding answers. And so it's meaningful and empowering to me to think about offering other ideas to people that are a little counter to the mainstream.
I'm really fascinated to hear that your journey started as a medical student. I was pre-med. I did a master's degree in basically public health policy, and I have a sister who's an M1 right now in medical school, so very familiar with the process. But the fact that we really have created this medical education system that makes you think a certain way and doesn't encourage scientific thinking and asking out of the box questions was one of the first things that really turned me off to going through with getting my MD later on in life. I haven't, maybe someday I will, who knows? But I think a lot of people are running up against that right now. And that certainly sounds like that was your experience. Do you think there's something that's become fundamentally wrong with how we're training the next generation of physicians?
Yeah, undoubtedly. It's pretty clear. And, there's lots of ideas we could postulate here about why that is. I think it's pretty clear that when most medical studies are funded by pharmaceuticals and medical schools receive funding from pharmaceuticals, that why would we learn anything in medical school other than drugs? And pharmaceuticals are valuable. They affect human life in a positive way, and also in a negative way. And so there's a place for pharmaceuticals. I've been a patient in the medical system and benefited from pharmaceutical drugs in the past. But at the same time, I think that that's only part of the options that we have as physicians or within a healing sphere. And it's just myopic the way that we're training doctors. There's no focus on dietary interventions, the complexity of our foods, the quality of foods. If there is any attention to nutrition, it's just very basic. It's calories, macronutrients, protein, fat, carbohydrates, maybe some focus on saturated fat versus polyunsaturated fat when it comes to lipids, but that's about where it stops. But our food is so complicated and so interesting, and it's such information for the human body that we're never taught about that. And I think it's just because the medical literature is complicated. It's really hard to make sense of what are we even going to tell the medical students to recommend to their patients. And I think that's where medicine gets stuck, is that medical schools, professors in medical school, residents who are teaching medical students and resident physicians, they don't have any idea. If you say diet is important, what diet are you going to say?
Yeah.
Maybe plant-based would be the most thought of diet positively within Western medicine, but I completely disagree with that. Maybe Mediterranean diet, but nobody even knows what the Mediterranean diet is, and nobody even understands what type of dietary pattern to describe to someone to teach them to eat in a Mediterranean way. And there's just no focus on the potentially harmful components of processed foods. And so doctors can't educate patients, and doctors are not educated in meaningful ways. It's really failing patients.
Hugely important, because I feel like 99% of our foods are ultra processed foods now. And I talk about this a lot on my live stream and a lot of my other short form content. But I'll walk through the grocery store, and even the health brand foods that I think are going to be the healthy alternatives, I'll turn it over and I'll read the label and just be shocked how long the ingredient list has become. I think you're right. The first breaking point of that Western medicine would typically think of is moving towards a plant-based diet. The Impossible Burger is marketed to us as this really healthy alternative. The new Just Egg alternative is this cute wonderful health-related packaging, but your philosophy is fundamentally different from that. You're most well known as the Carnivore MD. Why don't you believe in a plant-based diet? And for those that have no idea, what is a carnivore diet to begin with?
Yeah, so just to give a caveat here, I don't use the Carnivore MD moniker anymore. We can talk about why, but I didn't want to be quite that limited in my scope. For a long time, I did have that as my perspective, and I did write a book about the carnivore diet. I don't eat a strict carnivore diet anymore, but that type of eating is just animal foods. So meat, eggs, fish, chicken, organs, fat, salt, that's a carnivore diet, technically speaking. As I mentioned earlier, I've expanded my diet somewhat, and we can talk about that story if you want, but I eat some plant foods now, fruit, but mostly my diet is animal food still. I have organs, I have meat, I have raw dairy, which is interesting to me. I have butter, I have eggs, but I do eat a good amount of fruit. I eat carbohydrates. I find them very valuable in my life. The sourcing is important. And I don't eat a lot of vegetables. In fact, I should be honest and just say I don't eat any vegetables, full disclosure.
None. So, no vegetables at all.
Zero. Zero vegetables. So, but what is a vegetable, right? Let's talk about this. Vegetables are the roots, the stems, the leaves, and the seeds of plants. And when we talk about seeds, that's really seeds, nuts, grains, and beans, because if you plant those in the ground, they grow into plants. So one of the interesting ideas, hypotheses around a carnivore diet is that plants have defense chemicals. And that part is not really a hypothesis. That's scientific fact. The hypothesis within the carnivore sphere is that those defense chemicals are not great for all people, or that not everyone does well with plant defense chemicals, and that on balance, some people are hurt more by vegetables than they are helped by vegetables. So why do we eat vegetables in the first place? I think we eat vegetables, and we eat vegetables because of nutrients. So being told that vegetables are good for us is just kind of an adage, probably from our parents, our mothers. And most of the time, that framework is within the context of saying, please eat your peas or your green beans or your spinach, and don't eat Cocoa Puffs.
Yep.
So the narratives that many of us grew up with around vegetables are good for you, but really that narrative is vegetables are better than junk food. Okay, great. Like that's totally true. The leaves, the stems, the roots, the seeds of plants, they're better than junk food for sure. But are they unanimously or unequivocally beneficial for humans? Do they contain anything that could be harmful for us? That's an interesting question that bears some investigation, especially in people who are struggling. So I think that this question doesn't really even need to be asked by people who are doing great. If somebody's listening to this and they're eating a salad every day and they have energy, good libido, and they sleep well, and their body composition is where they want, they don't have rashes or thyroid issues, no autoimmune conditions, they're thriving, keep doing it. But what's so interesting to me is that there are now thousands, if not tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of individuals who I've connected with, have talked to personally, seen comments, DMs, who benefit from cutting some of those things out. And that's a valuable perspective. So a lot of the pushback I get online is with regard to certain vegetables that I may call into question. Broccoli was a recent one. And people will reasonably say there are no studies that say that broccoli is harmful for humans. And there are studies that show that certain components in broccoli or brassica vegetables have some benefits. And I think what's interesting about all of that is there certainly are compounds in broccoli and kale and this family of plants that can impair iodine absorption of the thyroid. The reality is that we have to eat a lot of them to make that a realistic possibility. But I think for more people than we're admitting, that is probably realistic. That people are not getting enough iodine, the iodine is not getting into the thyroid, and that these things are negatively affecting the thyroid. And that's just one of the compounds in these vegetables. And so I think that even though there's no randomized controlled trial that's ever been done to study is broccoli healthy or not, or all vegetables, that's interesting, and it makes me curious what's going on here. And so the science may not ever catch up to this, because who is going to fund a study looking at kale, right? Who stands to benefit? Like, the kale lobby is never going to fund that. The kale lobby doesn't have millions of dollars anyway, right? There's no pharmaceutical company. So we'll probably never have answers to these questions, but we have real humans for whom these changes make a difference. And that's interesting to me. I can't tell you, and I guess this is confirmation bias, because if people find me in the wild, but so many people have come up to me and said, I did this, I ate, like you, Paul, I ate meat, I ate some fruit, maybe they ate raw dairy, plus minus, basically meat and fruit, and their autoimmune conditions get better, and then they try and introduce vegetables and they get worse. That's interesting to me. That's really interesting. And I think that, does everybody need to cut out vegetables? No. But there is an honest conversation that if you look at the botanical complexity of these foods, they do have defense chemicals in them because plants are stuck in the ground. They don't want to get eaten.
Mm-hmm.
And the question fundamentally is, how good is any individual at detoxifying those toxins? And would their life have a better quality if they diminish them or if they cut them out completely? And that's the last point, which is what happens if you don't eat vegetables? Are you going to become deficient in anything? And I think not. This is a really interesting question as well. Really, we only think about 150 compounds in nutrition, right? We think of vitamins and minerals. We're only measuring about 150. If you look at Chronometer, which is a great website, and you put your diet into there, there's less than 150 metrics in there that'll tell you how much of every amino acid you're getting, how many of the B vitamins, B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B9, B12. It'll tell you about some micronutrients, but it won't tell you a lot of things. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's probably 40,000 nutritional components in our food. So there's so much that we're not measuring in our food. And some of that could be good, some of that could be harmful, some of that could cause issues for some people, but not others. There's no metric for oxalates on Chronometer. So like, you don't know how many oxalates you're getting in your diet, but oxalates are an important compound for humans to consider. They're one of these potentially negative things in plants. They're very high in spinach. They're very high in turmeric powder. They're very high in almonds. And you can think of someone making a smoothie with those exact three things and getting a huge amount of oxalates. And there's really no question that oxalates accumulate in the human body. We make a small amount of them from the breakdown of proteins, proline, and hydroxyproline. But when we consume foods that are very high in oxalates, and these would be the plant foods, animal foods don't have high amounts of oxalates, we can accumulate them. And there's interesting ideas here that, do they cause pain in joints? Do they cause thyroid issues? They certainly cause kidney stones. The most common type of kidney stone is a calcium oxalate kidney stone, which is formed from oxalates. And there's a whole group of people, and again, this goes back to the value of anecdote, the value of personal experience. It's women who have had crippling vaginal sort of vulvar pain, sort of this vulvar pain syndrome that goes away when they eat oxalates. So it's like, are the oxalates accumulating in soft tissues and causing joint pains or skin sensitivities? So there's women that can't sit, because they have these things, and they get better when they cut this out. So there's a lot of interesting ideas here, and it's very interesting for me just to think about this a little differently than the rest of the world. Because if you listen to Harvard, all vegetables are good, eat more vegetables. In fact, basically the best you can do is to eat no meat. So in terms of the nutrients that we know about, you can get all of them from meat and from fruit. You're not going to miss anything. And in fact, I would argue you'll get more of them in more bioavailable forms in higher amounts, generally speaking. And so, are there things in vegetables that we don't know about that you could be missing? It's totally possible. There's a lot of people that don't eat a lot of vegetables and they do just fine. And there's an interesting thing that happens when we eat animals that eat vegetables. You get a lot of secondary nutrition. So choosing to eat only plants certainly leaves out a lot of unique nutrients that occur only in animal foods. And this isn't something that's ever really talked about, this idea that creatine found to improve intelligence in vegetarians and vegans when they're supplemented with creatine, carnitine, choline, anserine, taurine, transvestinic acid, vitamin K2, vitamin B12. The list is really long of nutrients that are really only found in appreciable amounts in animal foods. But, the interesting thing is that if you eat animals, the animals are eating plants. So you have a little more insurance against unknown nutrients. There are no real nutrients that we know about that you're not going to get if you don't eat spinach, or if you don't eat kale, or if you don't eat almonds. But there's definitely things that are essential for optimal human health that you're not going to get if you don't eat meat.
I find this concept of the personal anecdote and somewhat confirmation bias, but just people sharing their stories with you so compelling, because that's really what your story was. As you mentioned earlier, you found this all out and you started asking these questions because you were dealing with autoimmune conditions in your own life and decided to try something new. So when you were in medical school, was it still the same advice? Plant good, meat bad, go in this direction, never go in this direction. And what on earth made you want to go in the opposite direction than what everybody else was telling you?
There was no nutritional advice in medical school. I never received any nutritional counseling, even when I would do rotations in gastroenterology or internal medicine or rheumatology, which is study of joints, and rheumatologists generally are people who are going to see folks with autoimmune conditions, or dermatology. You rotate through all of these things in both residency and medical school. And I love to ask gastroenterologists. These are doctors of the gut. And one of the most debilitating things you see people with a lot is inflammatory bowel diseases, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Similar, but not the same manifestation of autoimmune gut disease. So as humans, we put kilogram quantities of food into our guts every day. Do you think that maybe that food could have an influence on how the immune system around your gut, the lamina propria, is reacting to your body? But if you ask gastroenterologists, they'll tell you no, food has no impact on these diseases. Beyond gluten intolerance, beyond diagnosable celiac disease with a small intestinal biopsy or a jejunal aspirate, gastroenterologists don't generally see much connection between food and diet. And that kind of stuff just blows me away. I had a guy here, part of a film crew. We started filming a documentary a couple weeks ago, and he has plaque psoriasis. So similar autoimmune disease to eczema, a different manifestation. I said, did your dermatologist ever tell you this could be related to food? And he said, no, never. They want me to take a biologic drug, which is a monoclonal antibody, which increases his chance of cancer and respiratory illness. But they never tell him that it could be related to the fact that he's eating a pretty high junk food diet. And that, to me, is just disappointing and sad. And it's not the fault of the doctors, I don't think. We hit on it earlier in this podcast. It's the fact that it's not part of the medical curriculum. These doctors are all super intelligent and well-intentioned. They just don't see it in the literature. And so, but in some ways, we've become too smart for our own good. We're almost evidence limited. Western medicine loves to state we're evidence-based. We have studies that help guide our treatment. But the problem is that if there's not a study, they won't do it. So that's evidence limited. And that's where the value of anecdote and personal experience comes in. And of course, that's a much more challenging thing to get your head around. But there is a hive mind happening now with social media. For all of the negative things of social media, humans can connect in ways that we never could before. There are millions of people having these conversations every day on all of the platforms, and they can all say, this worked for me, this didn't work for me. That is a type of collective intelligence that's never been present. Never had that in medicine. Even 50 years ago, even 30 years ago, how does a doctor in Poughkeepsie, or upstate New York or New Jersey know what a doctor in rural California is seeing in his patients? They just don't know. And so if a doctor in Fresno, California is doing something, how are doctors anywhere else going to know? How are patients going to talk? How is a patient going to, with a plaque psoriasis that's not getting better, with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis not getting better, in northern Florida or in Missouri, how are they going to talk to each other? So there's a really interesting thing that never gets talked about now, which is this collective intelligence and sharing of information. And I think humans are beginning to learn that that's valuable and not to be dismissed, potentially just as valuable as Western medicine teachings. Yes, it's valuable when you have an illness, a car accident, whatever you have, to know what the doctor would recommend. Yes, it's valuable. It's also equally valuable to say, we have a tribe of millions of people that we can connect with. What are they experiencing and how do we parse this out? So it's a really interesting collective intelligence that I think is uniquely valuable.
As for your story, you mentioned that you kind of started out strictly with this carnivore diet concept, and you've evolved and changed your own opinions on that. Tell us more about what that journey looked like.
Yeah, so you asked me earlier, how did you get started doing this? I was thinking functional medicine because I wanted to get to the root cause of things. But functional medicine is all about the plants. But the story is that I was driving to the coast in Washington. It was probably a cold, rainy day to go surf. And when I was doing my residency in Seattle, I was listening to Rogan's podcast, and Jordan Peterson was on there. And at the very end of the podcast, Jordan Peterson talked about his autoimmune conditions, which sound like some sort of inflammatory arthritic condition. Rheumatoid arthritis, some variant thereof, and he had sleep apnea, probably connected with some sort of autoimmune throat condition, creating laxity in the tissues of his pharynx. And he said all of that stuff got way better when he just ate meat. And I thought, that's cool. I've never heard that. How's it possible? Plants are so valuable for humans. But I was fascinated by it because you don't hear stories like that in medicine because we're evidence limited, right? There's nobody in my residency is saying, oh, I had a patient with advanced dementia, Alzheimer's, and they got significantly better when they changed the quality of it. Nobody's ever presenting that case, right? Because that's going to be laughed out of the journal club because it's just one case and there's so many variables and we don't care about that. But this stuff is interesting to me because these conditions generally don't get better. Eczema doesn't just heal on its own for a lot of people. Psoriatic arthritis, plaque psoriasis, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's. A lot of these conditions, especially ulcerative colitis, often leads to colon resection. People lose their colon. These things don't often get better. But as I started to go down this rabbit hole, and I just saw all these stories, and I thought there is something here, and I want to explore it, especially when I started hearing stories of people with ulcerative colitis saying, I went to my doctor, they told me there was nothing to do about it. I said, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to try something like this. And it gets better. You think, what is going on there? So there's definitely a hypothesis to be generated that in some people, plants trigger autoimmune disease. That's a hypothesis, but it's borne out by a lot of collective intelligence evidence. Do we have randomized controlled trials to prove it? No. Do we need randomized controlled trials to talk about it or to recommend that people consider it if they're about to go and get a colectomy? I don't think so. I think that's kind of the value of what we do, right? Like, oh, you're going to have a surgeon remove your colon, maybe make some dietary change first. I don't know. It's up to the patient, a sovereign individual. But yeah, that was what I did. So I had eczema, and I think that there was something happening in my life at that time. I started using some mushroom extracts, chaga, reishi, cordyceps, and I had a huge eczema flare, and I was just over it. I have pictures of myself at the beach with my wetsuit, kind of like half on, and my whole chest is red. It's just this huge eczema flare. And I remember I went on a date with a woman at the time, and I had eczema all on my arm. And she asked me, what happened to your arm? And I was so self-conscious that I told her it was poison oak. Oh, I went surfing and I touched some poison oak. I don't know why. I mean, why is eczema something you don't want to talk about? But it felt shameful to me to be like, that's an autoimmune disease. Yeah. I'm a doctor and I can't even fix my own autoimmune disease. I rolled in a patch of poison oak. So I was just fed up with it. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna eat only meat. Let's go. And I went back from surfing and went to the dollar store, there was like a Food for Less. In Seattle, there was a store called Food for Less. And the amazing thing was that Food for Less had grass-fed ribeyes. And so you could get so I bought all of the grass-fed ribeyes at Food for Less. And I bought, I think I had some liver that I'd gotten from a farm that I like mailed to me. And I just started eating liver and heart and ribeyes and tallow and salt. And I did it for about 1.5 years, just like that. That was all I ate for 1.5 years.
Wow. What was that like? I mean, was it shocking on your body, or did you go through any sort of, oh my gosh, I'm only eating meat, I'm so bored with this phase, or was it easy?
It's interesting. As I mentioned earlier, I eat more than that now. But people always say, wasn't that so boring? And there might be some sex differences here, but most men I talk to they're happy to eat meat 3 times a day. It never gets boring. Like, animal foods don't get boring. This is really interesting. So a story, but it's relevant. In 2000, I thru-hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. So long before any of this happened, I thru-hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. I was 20 years old at the time, or maybe a little bit older, but I hiked from Mexico to Canada. It's 2,700 miles on a continuous
Always been
trail.
On my bucket list, by the way. So
yeah.
someday. Yeah,
it's cool. 2,700 miles of a continuous trail. And at the beginning of the trail, I really thought, I'm going to be vegetarian. This is my 20s. Vegetarian is the way to go. Meat is not healthy. Who knows what I was basing that on? But even I was susceptible to the zeitgeist. And so I brought mostly plant foods on the trail. I had a trail partner, a buddy named Broxton. And he brought beef jerky. And at the first resupply, which was probably 3 or 4 days into the trail, the first thing I did was eat a hamburger. And I thought that was the best hamburger I've ever had. This is crazy. Like, I need to eat meat on this trail. But the point of the story is that along the trail, which was 3.5 months, I never, ever got bored of animal foods. I would eat cheese every day. I could eat beef jerky every day. I could have eaten hamburgers every day, just with the bun, just with the beef. I didn't even need the bun. But I got sick of every single plant food that I had. Every single plant food. I had made this very, quote, nutritious morning overnight oats with buckwheat and flax seeds and oats. And after a month or two, I just threw it out. I just didn't even want to see it anymore. And someone that hasn't done this can't understand. It's not boredom. It's just you look at it and your body says, I don't want, something sweet with it. I don't think I had much. Maybe I had some honey. Even about honey, it just tasted like garbage to me. The only foods that I really look forward to eating at the end of the trail were, and this is interesting and insightful, processed foods and animal foods. And so processed foods similarly must do something to our satiety, because I could eat Pop-Tarts like nobody's business on the whole trail. And this was long before any attention to nutrition for me. I had no problem eating Pop-Tarts or beef jerky or hamburgers, even without the bun, or cheese. But I even got sick of peanut butter. And believe me, a lot of people, like, I never thought I would get sick of peanut butter. I got sick of peanut butter. And so it's just an interesting point to your question, that for me, a 1.5 years of only eating basically steak and animal fat and a few organs, I never got sick of it. It was always enjoyable.
How did that expand for you into fruits then, and more of a wide variety and diverse palate?
So the next part of the story is that, within a month or two, the eczema goes away. I get into probably long-term ketosis, and I feel generally pretty good in the beginning. I still can do my workouts. I'm doing okay. But I think it crept up earlier than I realized. But within probably 5 or 6 months, I started to have some symptoms of low electrolytes, whether cramping in my legs when I would sleep or when I would climb. I used to do a lot of climbing at the rock gym indoors in Seattle. And so when I was climbing, I would get cramps in my calves. And I started to have these issues right as I was ending my residency, which was probably 8 or 9 months into this, where I would have hypnagogic jerks, which means as I was falling asleep, I would feel like I was falling. And you wake yourself up. And it's like torture, because it happens multiple times, and then your fight or flight nervous system gets activated. And that was related to a magnesium deficiency, most likely. And the reason this happened for me, and the reason this happens for a lot of people, is that if you don't eat carbohydrates and you do long-term ketosis, you really waste electrolytes. You will waste sodium, you will waste chloride, you'll waste calcium, you'll waste magnesium, you'll waste potassium, and your body just gets kind of messed up from an electrolyte perspective. Some people may have differences versus other people, but we know, and this wasn't something I was taught in medical school, that though insulin has been widely vilified, insulin is an essential hormone for human life. And when you eat carbohydrates, insulin is going to go up, and that's a good thing for a lot of reasons. Not only does it signal to your body abundance, and it has effects on sex hormones, so you can reproduce and be fertile, it also tells your kidneys to hold on to these electrolytes. And so within the ketogenic community, and I'll say that a lot of people do well on keto for some amount of time. And ketogenic diets are a really interesting intervention, but I don't think they're ideal for humans, and they certainly weren't ideal for me. When you do that long term, you just don't have enough insulin signaling, and you just waste all these electrolytes. People in the ketogenic communities are eating massive amounts of salt.
Yeah.
I knew people who said they were eating 20 grams of salt per day or more. And, probably no real negative consequences, because if your kidneys work, you can get rid of that. But a lot of times on ketogenic diets, you have to eat massive amounts of salt or electrolytes because you're wasting so many of them. So this isn't an ideal state for humans, in my opinion. We can talk about keto versus not if you want. But I added fruit back to my diet, sort of having this moment of cognitive dissonance. I'm basically writing a book about the carnivore diet. At this point, I was almost done with it, and just thinking, wow, I need to add carbohydrates back. I'm going to feel better with them. So I knew that vegetables potentially had negative compounds. And I knew that when I added some things back to my diet, my eczema would come back. So I thought, what's the first thing I could add back for carbohydrates? And it made sense to me that it would be fruit. Fruit is this colorful, sweet thing that plants make, and they kind of want you to eat it. They don't necessarily want you to chew the seeds because those are the babies, but they want you to eat the fruit and poop out the seeds somewhere, or eat the fruit and throw the apple core somewhere and the seeds go germinate. So plants want you to eat the fruit. And if you look at plant foods, the fruits contain far fewer defense chemicals than the leaves and the stem, the roots and the seeds. And the fruits actually contain less defense chemicals as they ripen. So yeah, an unripe piece of fruit may have similar defense chemicals or amounts of defense chemicals as a quote vegetable. And I would argue that an unripe piece of fruit is a vegetable, but as the fruit ripens, the defense chemicals go down. So there's a clear signal to animals in the environment, like, don't eat me. And when it's ripe, it's colorful and we see it, and there's a hypothesis that humans have color vision to see fruit. They often turn from green to another color when they're ripe, so humans can pick them out. You know, in a sea of green, like right now I'm looking out at the jungle here in Costa Rica, it's a sea of green. But every once in a while I pass by a banana tree or a mango tree or a star fruit, and you see something a different color and your eyes go there immediately. And it's interesting because you see, oh, that's ripe. That's a piece of ripe fruit. I can eat that, especially when the mangoes get really red or yellow. So I started with fruit, and then I thought, okay, what about honey? And I started adding honey to my diet, first in small amounts, then in moderate amounts, kind of based on my activity. And I began to look at the research. And what I found was really interesting and humbling, because sugar gets probably appropriately vilified today. But there's not a lot of nuance in these conversations about sugar. Sugar is sugar. In the ketogenic community, a lot of well-meaning people will say, oh, a banana is the same as a Coca-Cola, same amount of sugar. And that's just not what you see in personal experience. It's not what you see in the literature. Even in fruit juice. I just was listening to a podcast with a researcher from UCSF who's a pediatric neuroendocrinologist, and he's well known for sounding the alarm about sugar, but he doesn't really like fruit juice. He says fruit is okay because of the fiber. And he says the fiber prevents you from absorbing the fructose, which isn't really true because you absorb the same amount whether there's fiber or not. But he says fruit juice is no good. But then if you look at the medical literature, there's so many studies, probably 20 to 30 studies, and I can't believe these studies have been done. I'm glad they were done. I just don't think this research will get funded today. It's kind of like a lot of movies you think of from 10 to 15 years ago. They could never make these movies today. They're just not politically okay. And I think a lot of this research that has been done in the nutrition space would never get done today for whatever reason, just no funding, or things have changed with the NIH, whatever. But there's about 20 to 30 studies where they give people fruit juice, whether it's watermelon juice, grape juice, pomegranate juice, orange juice, and you invariably see beneficial effects on the human body, whether it's delayed oxidation, lowered oxidized LDL, improved endothelial function on the inside of blood vessels. So this was really eye-opening to me, and it was humbling. And I thought, okay, I can probably drink some fruit juice. I can probably eat some fruit, and I can eat some honey. And that was kind of where I ended up for a long time. And that's basically where I am now. There's some nuances to my diet now. I added raw dairy eventually, but this sort of middle ground of eating animal foods, but also having plant foods in the form of fruit has worked really well for me. It's something that I thought might be called like an animal-based diet. I think Joe Rogan called it that when I was on there. And I just like the word animal-based because it stands in contradistinction to plant-based. And I think plant-based diets are so harmful for humans that I want to just, okay, I want people to know, like, okay, you can be plant-based, but you can also be animal-based. And so it's a little bit of like, it's kind of a nod to vegans. Like, okay, like we're plant-based, but these people over here are also animal-based, and that's okay too.
I love that. And I love hearing your personal testimony with all of this, because I do think the storytelling element is so compelling. Obviously, Jordan Peterson has been a fantastic voice for this, but there's countless other creators, doctors, nutritionists, people sounding the alarms all over the place that for whatever reason at the 30,000 foot societal level, we're giving people the wrong information. And there's a lot of speculation as to why that's happening. But to segue this a little bit and zoom out to the 30,000 foot level, do you think there is some sort of nefarious agenda behind the scenes with the loudest voices in society, specifically vilifying meat over and over and over again with more veracity every single month, it seems?
Yeah, I do. Um, I think that, you know, whether or not doesn't really matter. It's like if the other team is somehow cheating, you still have to play the game. I think we still can get the information out there. I think that there's way more money propping up plant-based interests than there is supporting meat. And this does wrap into sort of political conversations. I generally stay apolitical in all of my stuff, but it's all connected, right? Whether you're talking about climate or farming. I did an interview recently with an NPR affiliate in Boston. And again, I don't talk about my political views because I just don't think it's relevant to talking about health. But it is interesting to me. And they were obviously kind of left-leaning, and they really wanted to paint me in a certain way. At the end of the interview, they asked me, they said, kind of as I talked about, they said, hey, we heard that you started the carnivore diet hearing Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan. What do you think of Jordan Peterson? And I kind of laughed out loud, and obviously they didn't include this part in their interview. I said, what does it have to do with anything I talked about?
It doesn't.
Human health, but they're trying to paint me as a neocon, like far right, misogynistic, anti-feminist human. And like my political views have nothing to do with any of this. And so the fact that there's just an agenda against meat within the political sphere makes me think there's something going on here. And I don't know if it's related to climate change or it's related to like political action committees or funding, but I think that there's a lot of money to be made in processed food. And there's a lot of money to be made in processed plant food. And there's also probably a lot of money to be made in processed animal foods. But I think that the margins are way better in processed plant foods. And if people can convince the masses that processed plant foods are a good alternative, then we have multi-billion-dollar businesses. And there's something going on there. So I don't really think about it too much, and I don't really let it get me frustrated. I just think there is some suppression. I mean, we see this, the social media outlets all have political leanings, and thankfully they still allow me to talk about meat. But there's been a lot of things that I've talked about that have gotten censored, I think unfairly or without actual substance. So I've had a number of videos on raw milk taken down on YouTube, and I don't understand it, right? Like, why is raw milk a political issue, or why is raw milk something dangerous? I'm talking about the science. I'm telling people, hey, get it from a good producer. Like every raw food has a danger of food poisoning. Obviously many fewer people drink raw milk than eat vegetables, but the single greatest source of food poisoning every year is raw vegetables. Yeah, it's not animal foods, it's not raw milk. And the number of cases of food poisoning from raw milk, which do exist, are very small, and they're growing smaller when people are getting it from farms that are doing it in a very antiseptic, clean way, which is doing interesting things for scale. I did a video on YouTube about breastfeeding, and I talked about, I think it was an Ask Me Anything episode, and somebody asked me, like, what is a reasonable formula alternative? And I thought it was a really interesting question. If you look at what's in baby formula, it's an atrocity. I think it's mandated by law that baby formula has to contain seed oils. We haven't talked about seed oils. We can talk about why I think it's a bad thing. But baby formula must contain seed oils. And so I thought, okay, if someone can't breastfeed, or the infant has a milk allergy or whatever, what do you feed your infant? And like, you cannot talk about this on YouTube. And I think, why?
So your video got taken down for even bringing it up, basically.
Yeah. I think I said in the video, this isn't health advice. Anytime I'm talking to someone about what they're going to feed their child, it's super charged. Maybe not politically charged, but super charged. I'm never going to tell any parent what to do with their child. And so I made caveats, and I said, this is just my perspective. I don't have kids. Take from it what you will. I would never tell a parent what to do with their child, and it still got taken down. So there's all kinds of things like this that are they're just not appropriate for YouTube. And you think, why does it violate community guidelines? And YouTube has done strange things with their health content now, where they say that if your views differ from those of the WHO or the CDC, we're not going to promote your content as much. And so I think, well, that's about everything that I talk about now, because the WHO is not a huge fan of meat, and the CDC definitely doesn't think meat is great for humans. And so it's interesting because there's something going on, and how nefarious that is it is what it is. I think ultimately truth wins, and the genie is out of the bottle. We're all connected in a greater sort of connectivity and communication intelligence. And so the content can be suppressed, but only for so long. And so I think there's something going on there, and it probably just is money. It's just, I mean, that's it's not good for anyone's bottom line for people to eat unprocessed foods, whether those are plants or animals. Even if you're eating vegetables, like that doesn't support a processed food company. And so that's not good for anybody's bottom line. And then there's a lot of lawsuits that have happened against pharmaceutical companies. So, when you really look at that stuff, it does seem like it's kind of sinister. And I had a guy on the podcast, Callie Means, who used to be a lobbyist. He used to do consulting for Big Food. He worked for Coca-Cola, and his stories were just crazy.
I bet.
They're just crazy. That's like kind of the whistleblower type stuff. And it's just, if you had any question about the motives, these businesses are highly motivated by making money, which is what they do. It's capitalist society. It's okay to do it. But they really do, I think, sometimes go to unethical lengths to confuse consumers. We've seen this historically over and over. So whether it's Big Food, processed food, or pharmaceuticals, it's hard to say where it's coming from. But I think there is a push. And then there's also this idea, I don't know if you heard about this. I think it was some sort of artificial sweetener organization that was paying dietitians to make content saying that artificial sweeteners were okay, or they weren't harmful, or something like this. And it's just like there's a lot of dollars flowing into the social media space now, double-edged sword, to confuse the picture. And I don't know how health consumers navigate the cacophony, honestly. I think they find people like you who they just like. And that's a very valid thing that we do as humans, right? We find a human and we think, I trust that human. There's just something about the way that human talks. They show emotion. People say, I just trust that human. And so that's how people do it now, which is great, but not always, there's a lot of people who are very likable, who have very different perspectives on things now. So how do people even cut through that? And it's something I've been thinking about. And I think that I'll just offer this and then I'll pause. I think that if people are ending up in that situation, numbing amount of conflicting information, I would just say that my framework is always, if you're thriving, don't change anything. If you're not thriving, question your nutritional assumptions. And then I don't think any health consumer needs to be a researcher at the PhD or master's level or an MD to read the medical literature. And I do think if we just think about where humans have come from, it helps us gain a lot of intuition here. That to me it's always been interesting, anthropology. And of course, it's not without flaws, but if people listening to this or people in the health space are finding themselves adrift or really just overwhelmed by this flood of conflicting health information, think about where humans have come from. Because consistently, when I look at the medical literature as a doctoral level clinician with an MD, what I see is that when we do things that are different than what our genome expects and what humans have done for 450,000 years of Homo sapien evolution, it usually doesn't end up well for us. That's as simple as that. And that's perhaps an overly simplistic metric, but I think it's very valuable. Whether it's pesticides, whether it's seed oils, whether it's PFOs or PFAs, perfluoroalkyl substances, whether it's glyphosate, right? Whether it's highly processed food, whether it's carrageenan, it's consistent across artificial sweeteners. It's like, if we're doing something that humans have never done, we're probably not adapted to it, and it's probably not great for us. And there's going to be a lot of confusing data, and people are going to say, no, it's fine. But use intuition, I think, will guide people pretty well.
Oh my gosh. I have literally 20,000 other questions for you because this has been the best conversation ever. But in the interest of time, where can people go to find all of your content about seed oils, about lab-grown meat, about these permanent chemicals in our clothing even? You've been really outspoken about toxins in the environment outside of what we consume through food as well. How can they support you, and where can they learn more if they're looking to get more interested in this?
So it's Paul Saladino MD now is the handle across all the platforms. So if you search Paul Saladino, Saladino, like salad, ironically, and dinosaur, Saladino MD, you'll find me everywhere. And so if you Google that, you'll find my website. It's every platform is at Paul Saladino MD.
And Dr. Saladino, do you have any message of encouragement or a good first step for anyone who's watching this and they're thinking, I really need to make a change in my own life, but I have no idea where to start or where to source the right information to get started on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, if somebody is at that stage where they want to do that, that's great. You've already won the battle. I often just will say that I really appreciate people who are in the vegan space because they're making an intentional choice with regard to their diet. So no matter what you do, don't stay stuck. Make some intentional choice in your life with regard to your diet. Do something. If the vegan arguments are the most compelling to you, try a vegan diet, but be honest about the way that you feel over time and check your blood work and nutritional markers and see how you feel. But do something. And if you find this kind of conversation valuable, this is where you can find more information about all these things. But doing something is the most important thing. And I think that if people start down that path of intentional dietary choices, they will eventually end up somewhere. You can't help but end up somewhere where you're healthier, right? If you make intentional choices, if you're honest with yourself about how you feel, you will ping pong around, but you will soon end up in a place where you feel better. And that's the ultimate goal. You can't help but get better doing that. And I've had missteps along the way too. I was a raw vegan 15 years ago for 7 months, and I tried it. And at first I thought I was doing great. And then I realized I had gas so bad that nobody wanted to be around me. And I couldn't get better. And I lost 20 pounds of lean muscle mass. And yeah, immediately overnight, I gained muscle. And anyway, so I've tried it all too. And that's what it's about. It's just exploring and seeing what works and having an open mind. But the intention to make the change is what's most important.
Well, we sure are grateful for your voice exploring all of these questions for us and breaking free from the mold of all of the insane things going on in Western medicine these days. So, Dr. Saladino, thank you so much for joining us. We'll make sure to send everybody your way to get started on their own intentional journey.
Thanks for having me.